From 745 to 727 BC, Tiglath-Pileser III ruled the Neo-Assyrian Empire. He was a major figure in the rise of Assyria to power in the ancient Near East, and his reforms to the empire's military and administrative systems are still studied today. He ascended to the throne amid internal turmoil, enacting extensive reforms that centralized power, improved bureaucratic efficiency, and made the military a professional fighting force. His tactical military operations expanded Assyrian dominance over extensive territories, encompassing the Levant, Anatolia, and even Egypt, thereby securing vital trade routes and resources. He is also recognized for introducing innovative tactics, including the utilization of iron weaponry and sophisticated siege techniques, bolstering Assyria's military dominance. He also reconstructed the empire into provinces, overseen by local officials, and utilized systematic deportations and resettlements to assimilate the diverse populations and avert insurrections. His legacy is characterized by the creation of a formidable and extensive empire that attained unparalleled territorial expansion and established the groundwork for the enduring power and influence of Assyria in the centuries that would come. Hello, welcome to the channel. Here we are again, going way back, not quite arriving in the Bronze Age, but definitely well within the realm of that ancient world. As always, if you like the sort of content I make, you can just support by liking the video, subscribing, and telling all of your buddies to come and join the party. Now, with that being said, let's get nice and comfortable. And so we must say before we begin the circumstance surrounding Tiglath-Pileser's rise to power. They're a little bit obscure, equally as contentious. We just don't quite have the evidence about the exact process of his accession. We do have some records that do suggest that he may have seized the throne by force, but this is merely a suggestion. The occurrence of a revolt in 746 to 45 BC in Nimrud, the Assyrian Empire's capital, and a subsequent replacement of officials and governors after 745 BC certainly have the implication that his path to the throne may have involved considerable upheaval. But this is just a suggestion, is not concrete proof of it. Seems to certainly be well within the realm of possibilities. And then, of course, we have his lineage as depicted by Assyrian sources that is similarly complex and similarly inconsistent. While most of the Assyrian kings attributed their ascent to both a little bit of divine favor, a little bit of royal bloodline, Tiglath-Pileser's inscriptions credit only divine selection as the reason for his rule. According to the Assyrian king list, which chronicles all the rulers of Assyria, his predecessor and supposed father was Ashur-nirari V. However, Tiglath-Pileser's own inscriptions claim that he was actually Ashur-nirari's brother, and rather the son of Adad-nirari III. Well, what do the scholars think? Well, they generally agree that Tiglath-Pileser was likely a usurper. Despite his usurpation, Tiglath-Pileser's claim to the throne was still legitimate, likely supported by victory in a civil struggle within the ruling family. But there's also another suggestion that states that Tiglath-Pileser might not have been related to the previous royal line at all. There certainly seems to be a lot of speculation. It's just the nature of this time period, where we receive our information from primary sources somewhat fragmentary, well, literally in fragments sometimes, as we pull out the tiny little pieces of the tablets out of the ground. But what we do know is that following his accession, there is no record of opposition or any further rebellion, indicating that he rather quickly secured his position. Questions do remain regarding his precise familial relationship with Ashur-nirari and Adad-nirari. While the Assyrian Kings list names him as the son of Ashur-nirari, some experts, including Feichan, Shiego Yamada, and some other archaeologists, modern historians, propose that this might have actually been a mistake by the scribe. I hope somebody got fired for that blunder. With it being more plausible that Tiglath-Pileser was the son of Adad-nirari III. Well, also there is the possibility of his descent from Ashur-nirari cannot be entirely dismissed, given the 38-year gap between Adad-nirari's reign and the rise of Tiglath-Pileser. Perhaps we'll never know. Either way, that scribe, I hope he lost his job if it was a mistake. Now, according to the Eponym Chronicle, which is a record of Assyrian officials and notable events for each year, there was a significant revolt in Nimrud in the year before Tiglath-Pileser's accession. This rebellion in 746, along with Tiglath-Pileser's subsequent coronation, suggests that it might have been more of a coup action. But it seems that he was not directly involved in leading the uprising. Some interpretations of the chronicle imply that he may have been aware or even just supported it from afar. The first official Tiglath-Pileser, appointed as Eponym in 744, was Bel-Dan, and he was appointed as the governor of Nimrud, strengthening the idea that the revolt and Tiglath-Pileser's rise were indeed connected. Whether or not he was leading from the front, well, that's still up for debate. There are also accounts that the rebellion of 746 was initiated by one Shamshi-Ilu, a prominent official during the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser's predecessor, and subsequently quelled by Tiglath-Pileser. Shamshi-Ilu's absence from records during Pileser's reign suggests he may have indeed rebelled. In fact, a few scholars do believe that Tiglath-Pileser or his supporters confronted not only Shamshi-Ilu but also Ashur-nirari, possibly in separate clashes. Now back to the Eponym Chronicle. It presents additional evidence that Tiglath-Pileser may have shared power with Ashur-nirari during his early years. The sequence of eponyms during Tiglath-Pileser's initial reign deviates from the usual order. While the king would typically hold the eponym title in his second regnal year, this title was given to Bel-Dan in 744, with Tiglath-Pileser only assuming the role later in 743. This anomaly of sorts, along with the presence of two dividing lines in the chronicle, one beneath the entry for 746, possibly marking Tiglath-Pileser's rise, and another for 744, maybe signifying Ashur-nirari's end. Either way, it suggests that Ashur-nirari may have ruled jointly with Tiglath-Pileser at least until 744, after which he was well and truly out of the picture. Since the second line comes immediately after a note that documents the length and end of Ashur-nirari's reign, it is unlikely to be an error. According to the Eponym Chronicle and the Assyrian King List, Ashur-nirari ruled for 10 years, and that's only feasible if he did so until 744 rather than 745. It's also unlikely that a civil war broke out if Ashur-nirari did rule until 744, because Tiglath-Pileser is known to have launched campaigns against Assyria's foreign adversaries during this period. and that would have been impossible if he was also embroiled in internal strife. Just simply too many moving parts. Well, the Assyrian king list mentioned in the Bible are typically known today by their biblical names, the Assyrian kings mentioned in the Bible, because Assyria has been primarily known for centuries through its appearances in the Hebrew Bible. Of course, we did have all of the tablets before then, but, well, archaeology in its original stages were only really chasing biblical matters. In fact, that was the entire reason why things were set up in Egypt in the first place, to trace the events of the book of Exodus. Fortunately, I don't think they found anything. Well, Tiglath-Pileser was the original Akkadian name, and the Hebrew Tiglath-Pileser is the source of the modern name Tiglath-Pileser. Tiglath-Pileser was apparently a regnal name, and it means my trust belongs to the son of Ashur. And apparently this was taken upon his accession to the throne, as many people adopt different names when they do so. Now, Ninurta was the son of Ashur, and was worshipped at the temple of Ashur. Ninurta was also considered the son of the Assyrian national deity Ashur by the time of the reign of Tiglath-Pileser. The name Pulu, whose etymology is admittedly unknown, is associated with Tiglath-Pileser in a number of non-contemporary sources, including the Bible, Babylonian king list, Ptolemaic canon, and the writings of later Babylonian and Greco-historians. No modern historian or Babylonian source mentions Tiglath-Pileser by name, and in fact there was no proof that it was ever used formally, despite the fact that it is occasionally understood as a second regnal name. Still, there's no proof that any Assyrian monarch ever used more than one regnal name during the period in which they reigned. Now, a little bit more about Assyria now in general, and the city of Ashur. Now, previously a city-state centered on the city of Ashur itself, Assyria became a prominent state under the Middle Assyrian Empire, around about the 14th century BC. So we're certainly going back to pretty much the Bronze Age, the end days of it, before the Sea People came and ruined everything. Well, following the 12th century BC, the Middle Assyrian Empire began to decline and was eventually confined to the Assyrian heartland region alone, contracted back to its original state. Now, even though active warrior kings occasionally stopped the decline, reconquest did not continue until the reign of Ashur-dan from 934 to 912, who conducted campaigns in the northwest and across the northeast region. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is said to have begun with the accession of Ashur-nirari II, and that was the son of Ashur-dan I. Former Assyrian territories were gradually reclaimed under the early Neo-Assyrian kings, and the kings essentially had to rebuild the Assyrian Empire from scratch. So the project's success was an incredible accomplishment. The Neo-Assyrian Empire became the preeminent political force in the ancient Near East under Ashur-nirari, reigning from 883 to 859, Shalmaneser III, reigning after him until 824, the son of Ashur-nirari, further increased the size of the Assyrian territory, but his enlarged domain was of course difficult to stabilize. His final years marked a new period of decline and stagnation that was characterized by internal and external conflict. The emergence of the northern kingdom of Urartu and the growing political power and influence of the magnates, a political group of Assyrian courtiers and officials, were Shalmaneser's two biggest issues in the later years of his rule. Since many vassal states saw submission to Urartu as a practical alternative to Assyria, Urartu's rise posed a threat to Assyrian hegemony. The Urartian writing system, religion, culture, and government were all very similar to that of Assyria. Like the Assyrian kings, the Urartian kings were also autocrats, despite being divided by the Taurus Mountains. Urartu and Assyria frequently engaged in military conflicts as a result of the imperialist expansionism pursued by their respective rulers. The Urartian army briefly matched that of Assyria. However, the Urartians achieved their own triumphs. Despite the Assyrians' numerous victories against Urartu, particularly the looting of Urartu's heartland toward the end of Shalmaneser's rule. The Assyrian army, under Ashur-nirari V, was routed at Arpad in 754 by the Urartian king Sarduri II, which might have actually prevented the Assyrian army from engaging in combat, at least for a few years. Since the magnates had progressively taken over as the main political actors and the central authority had weakened, the Assyrian kings were basically unable to handle external threats. The Assyrian royal power peaked during the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser's three predecessors, Shalmaneser IV, 783 to 773, Ashur-dan III, 73 to 55, and Ashur-nirari V. Shamsi-Ilu, the Turtanu commander-in-chief, during Shalmaneser IV's reign, had the audacity to claim military triumphs for himself instead of actually crediting them to the king. As a ruler, Ashur-nirari V seems to have been comparatively inactive, hands-off approach. He only made 3 campaigns, spent most of his reign in Assyria, and isn't known to have done really anything in terms of construction. I suppose he's just enjoying the good life of that Iron Age royalty. One of Tiglath-Pileser's key early reforms was to increase the king's authority by decreasing the power of the magnates. The magnates' wealth and power were diminished when the large provinces they had previously controlled were divided into smaller units and placed under provincial governors chosen by the monarchy. Officials lost their authority to commission inscriptions pertaining to construction and military operations, and the king was now the only one with his authority. The names of some historically significant officials, like the Turtanu Shamshi-Ilu, were purposely removed from the inscriptions and records as part of a practice known as damnatio memoriae. We, of course, get this from the Latin to damn somebody's memory. The ability of the magnates to overthrow the king was all but destroyed by these reforms. As for the Assyrian army, they were revitalized by Tiglath-Pileser, who turned it from a conscripted army that was only gathered in the warm seasons and was only active during certain seasons into a professional army. These conscripts were mostly replaced by skilled, trained, and specialized soldiers under Tiglath-Pileser, much more effective. He brought in new and improved logistics, technology, and weaponry. New types of siege engines were among his most significant contributions. During his rule, the army's size was further expanded by hiring mercenaries from Babylonia, the Zagros Mountains, and even Anatolia, that's around modern-day Turkey. as well as by recruiting soldiers from the various conquered Assyrian territories. Even though Tiglath-Pileser made enormous sums of money from his conquest, it seems he did not put much of it into the Assyrian heartland. The only construction he is known to have done was a new palace in Nimrud. Rather, the majority of the funds likely went to projects in the provinces and the formation of the new army, doubling down on conquest protocol. But the brutality of his conquest served to highlight the king's might and authority. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people were also frequently reseated. Tiglath-Pileser's reign saw the start of frequent mass deportations, a practice that persisted under his successors, even though earlier monarchs had resettled people. This policy had two intended purposes. First, to lessen local identities in areas that had been conquered in order to prevent a revolt, and second, to recruit and relocate workers to areas that the Assyrian kings needed, such as the undeveloped and underutilized provinces. The resettled individuals were not injured, neither were they killed. At least, that's what they tell us. Despite the fact that the Assyrian resettlements were likely disastrous for them and the areas which they originated, the labor and skills of the deportees were of course highly valued. They made their travels and new communities as safe and cozy as they could. Tiglath-Pileser's reign is distinguished by a number of huge military campaigns in all directions, in addition to his new reforms. Even though Tiglath-Pileser wrote his annals on carved stone slabs that adorned his palace in Nimrud, detailing his military exploits in great detail, these are not well preserved. So for a number of his campaigns, we can only really produce a general outline. In 744, he launched his first campaign, attacking Babylonian territory on the east bank of the Tigris. With the Assyrio-Babylonian border moved in Tiglath-Pileser's favor, this conflict was quickly resolved. He then established the two new provinces of Bit Amban and Parsua during his campaign in the surrounding Zagros Mountains in 743. Along a crucial trade route that foreshadowed the later Silk Road, the new province of Zagros were established. The Assyrian triumphs in 744 and 43 showed the neighbors of the empire that the Assyrian period of stagnation was over. Iranzu, king of the Manaeans, a people who lived in northwest Iran, met with Tiglath-Pileser in person and formed an alliance in 744 as a result of Tiglath-Pileser's success. Since Iranzu's realm was well positioned to defend Assyria from Urartian raids, Tiglath-Pileser enthusiastically accepted the alliance. Previously, Iranzu's predecessors had maintained their kingdom's independence by switching allegiance between Urartu and Assyria. Sarduri II of Urartu became alarmed by these events and stepped up his attempts to challenge and subvert Assyrian dominance. Later, in 743, Sarduri and his army reached the Assyrian border of the Euphrates River, with reinforcements from other Assyrian kingdoms and states. Tiglath-Pileser fought Sarduri close to Arpad the same year. Tiglath-Pileser led a number of campaigns in the Levant between 743 and 32, which resulted in a significant annexation of the territory and the loss of the independence for many of the region's ancient states. Because of Arpad's strategic importance, and as retaliation for giving Sarduri access to the Assyrian frontier, he decided to take Arpad after defeating Sarduri. Arpad was then fully annexed in 740, following a protracted siege, and 3 campaigns spread over 3 years. Both Urartian troops and troops from other Syrian cities and smaller states provided support to Arpad during the conflict. The Assyrian army did not just pillage the city after capturing it and then withdraw, unlike how they handled Syrian cities in the past. Rather, the areas under Arpad's authority were incorporated into the new Assyrian Empire and divided into 2 provinces. Following his triumph at Arpad, he was rewarded by the Phoenician city of Tyre, the Aramean kingdom of Aram-Damascus, and the Syro-Hittite kingdoms of Gurgum, Kuma, Carchemish, and Kue, some of whom had previously dispatched troops to support Saduri. Of course, the rulers of the Levant were on high alert after Arpad was annexed, everyone looking over their shoulder, wondering when their time would come. Many Levantine states had sought to grow and establish themselves as powerful kingdoms during the Assyrian stagnation period, which the Assyrians may have interpreted as aggressive, isolationist, and just all anti-Assyrian. And so Tiglath-Pileser persisted in his endeavors in Syria in 738, establishing 3 new provinces of Kulania, Hattarika, and Simira, as well as capturing some territories south of Arpad. He claimed that the Syro-Hittite kingdom of Hama, who had ruled these territories, were actively conspiring against him. He used a well-planned and prepared strategy in his successful conquest of the Levant. First, he defeated smaller kingdoms with a swift, all-encompassing attack, rather than launching an assault on the capitals of the bigger states. His early conquest placed flat and coastal areas under his control, allowing Assyrian forces to advance quickly and effectively through the area in subsequent campaigns. The Syro-Hittite kingdom of Patin was subjugated and absorbed by Tiglath-Pileser during the campaign against Hama. Hama was spared complete annexation. Instead, the kingdom was permitted to maintain some degree of autonomy as a vassal state. More states in the region, including the Kingdom of Israel, several states in eastern Anatolia, and the Phoenician city of Byblos and some Arab tribes, paid tribute to the Assyrians as a result of the victory. During the conflict, Hama had received aid from Israel and Damascus. The 5 Anatolian kingdoms that started paying tribute to Assyria most likely did so in hopes of receiving Assyrian assistance in fending off the expansionist kingdom of Phrygia, which threatened everyone's existence, rather than out of fear of the Assyrian conquest. Occasionally, the Anatolians attempted to pit Assyria and Phrygia against one another, and it yielded disastrous results. According to the Annals of Tiglath-Pileser, King Wasusarma of Tabal acted as if he were the equal of Assyria, and because of this, he was overthrown in 730 after he stopped paying the required tribute. For the 5th time in 734, Tiglath-Pileser advanced upon the Levant, marching all the way south to the Egyptian border. Assyria and Egypt shared a border for the first time in history as a result of this campaign, which led to the conquest of Gaza and the submission of many states, thereby bringing the entire Levant under the direct or indirect Assyrian rule. Either way, you always had an Assyrian looking over your shoulder. The Munna Arab tribe, Judah, Edom, Ascalana, Moab, and Ammon all started honoring Tiglath-Pileser. By expanding his dominion over the Levant, Tiglath-Pileser isolated Aram-Damascus and Israel from Egypt, which had occasionally provided assistance to the Levantine states, and created a semicircle of control around them. Aram-Damascus became geopolitically isolated as a result of the Assyrian efforts, and its population was left without a supply of food. And so, Tiglath-Pileser made the decision to solidify his conquest in 733. He ran another campaign this year against Aram-Damascus, the region's strongest surviving native state, which was backed by Israel and the Assyrian tributaries Tyre and Asculana. Aram-Damascus lands were annexed by Tiglath-Pileser after Damascus fell in 732. The same battle saw Tiglath-Pileser defeat Israel, annex the northern part of the kingdom as the province of Megiddo, and subjugate the southern part as a vassal kingdom. He also took Tyre. The Israelites interpreted the shrinking and massive shrinkage of Israel as confirmation of the prophet Amos's prophecies of impending disaster from a few decades earlier. And so Tiglath-Pileser and his armies encountered Arab tribes directly as a result of Assyria's enormous western expansion, and some of them started to pay tribute. In an attempt to strengthen his hold on southern Syria, he launched an offensive against the Kedarites south of Damascus in 733. The Kedarite queen, Samsi, was unprepared for the surprise attack, and the Kedarites were routed with ease. Despite its victory, Tiglath-Pileser recognized that he would not be able to successfully rule the Kedarites' lands, and so he permitted Samsi to keep control of her realm, albeit with an Assyrian official keeping watch and directing some of the finer points of the political activities. Oh, we can't let them have too much freedom, can't we? It was then that Tiglath-Pileser's attention shifted towards southern Babylon in his final years. During the Neo-Assyrian era, Babylonia was generally weaker than its northern neighbor, but it had once been a sizable and extremely powerful kingdom that had been in centuries of competition with Assyria. Babylonia suffered from internal ethno-cultural divisions, as well as a poorly organized army. Although they were not the only notable group in the area, Babylonians did control the majority of the major southern cities, including Babylon, Kish, Ur, Uruk, Borsippa, and Nippur. The majority of the southernmost land was ruled by Chaldean tribes, who were led by chieftains who frequently quarreled with one another. The Arameans were known for stealing from the surrounding areas, and also lived on the outskirts of populated areas. During his reign, Tiglath-Pileser monitored southern affairs through his agents. Nabu-Mukinseri, a Chaldean chieftain from the Bit Amukani tribe, became the king of Babylon in 731. The accession of Nabu-Mukinseri, who sought to mend the divisions in Babylonia, was viewed by Tiglath-Pileser as a provocation, and therefore a danger to Assyrian hegemony and interests. Something had to be done about that. Thus, Tiglath-Pileser spent the ensuing years working to overthrow Nabu-Mukinseri and his followers, in order to guarantee that Nabu-Mukinseri would not receive any assistance from Elam, which frequently opposed Assyrian interests. Assyrian armies first blockaded the eastern border of Babylonia. The Bit Shalani and Bit Sha'ali were among the Chaldean tribes and Aramean clans that Tiglath-Pileser subsequently vanquished and subdued. In 730, the real battle for Babylonians' dominance started. Assyrian emissaries are known to have traveled to Babylon during this year 730, urging the population to simply surrender to Tiglath-Pileser, open up the gates, and if they did, they'd get some nice little tax breaks, and also amnesty from the king. Not a bad deal if you really need the tax breaks. Well, the offer was, however, turned down by the Babylonians. You see, at this point, Nebuchadnezzar was most likely leading the Babylonian war effort from his ancestral home city of Sabia, rather than being in Babylon itself. Not sure if Tiglath-Pileser knew that or not. Either way, Tiglath became the first Assyrian king to be acknowledged as such by the Babylonians when he conquered Babylonian in 729 and declared himself king of both Assyria and Babylon. And that is one of the titles of the old kings of Persia. Usually it's King of Kings, King of the Universe, King of Assyria and Babylon, this sort of thing. It goes on for a little while, but a very, very long title. Now, despite losing Sabia that same year, Nebuchadnezzar seems to have resisted Tiglath-Pileser until at least 728, according to some documents dated to his fourth regnal year. The Bit Dakuri and Bit Yakin, two of the most formidable Chaldean tribes, paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser as the new king. At this time, the Bit Yakin were led by Marduk-Apla-Iddina II, who would become a fierce enemy of Assyria in the years after Tiglath's rule. In contrast to many other Assyrian conquests, Babylonia remained a single kingdom in personal union with Assyria, rather than being split up into provinces. The main reason for this was the Assyrians' deep regard for Babylonian religion and culture. Very deep roots. It goes back a while. And it's one of the reasons why you wanted to be the king of Assyria and Babylon. Having Babylon was the real prize. It'd been around for a long, long time. Well, in light of this regard, and the fact that Babylonia was beginning to recover economically, Tiglath made an effort to persuade the people to accept the concept of domination by Assyria. He led campaigns against the remaining Chaldean strongholds in the far south that opposed his rule, and he twice took part in the religiously significant New Year Akitu festival, which required the king's presence as a matter of tradition. Iaba, the queen of Tiglath-Pileser, seems to have been quite obviously not of Akkadian ancestry. In fact, Iaba's name may have come from the Arabic or West Semitic roots or etymologies for the words beautiful. Iaba may have been a princess from the kingdom of Judah, according to a 1998 theory by Stephanie Daly that she was of Hebrew descent. Now, based on the name Atalia, a later queen who was thought to have been related to Iaba, and the fact that it was similar to the name Athalia, which was given to a Judean queen who ruled roughly a century earlier, she argues that the name Atalia's ending might be a theophoric element derived from Yahweh. Both people have agreed with Daly's arguments and disagreed with them. Well, either way, we might not really know much about that one. I'm not too good with the linguistics of that area. Asian languages I'm really good with. I speak Chinese almost fluently. I know a fair bit of Japanese. And, well, Korean I can at least read. But I can't really speak too much. But it's very easy to learn how to read Korean. I suggest you do it. It'll take you like 3 hours and you'll be fine. Little practice. Anyway, back to the topic. Oh, it is thought that at this time Tiglath-Pileser had passed away quietly from old age. He was succeeded by his son, Shalmaneser V. Now, Shalmaneser was known by his birth name, Ululayu, during Tiglath-Pileser's reign, and Shalmaneser was a regnal name that he adopted upon taking the throne in 727. He probably took part in some of his father's campaigns too, as that was the normal practice, and he's known to have written in his father a number of letters, many of which included updates on the state of the territories that he oversaw. Sargon II succeeded Shalmaneser as king within a few years, most likely as the result of his overthrow and murder. Although Sargon was linked to the earlier kings by the Assyrian king list, which asserted that he was the son of Tiglath-Pileser, this assertion is absent from the majority of Sargon's inscriptions, which emphasize that Ashur summoned and appointed him as the king. Well, either way, Tiglath-Pileser left behind a legacy that's extremely important to history. Most people believe that his rule signaled the start of a completely new era of Assyrian imperialism. In fact, he's the first Assyrian king for whom there are external viewpoints and narratives of his reign. Most of the time, you just have the one opinion. But this time we have other people writing about him from other parts of the world. Well, I suppose they were part of the Assyrian Empire at some point, so that is also arguable, but we're just playing semantics now. Well, he's also, of course, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible and the Babylonian Chronicles. In fact, the Hebrew Bible pretty much ignores all of Mesopotamian history before Tiglath-Pileser, and that's got to tell you something. The events of Tiglath-Pileser's reign are described in the Old Testament from the viewpoint of the southern kingdom of Judah, mainly in the book of Isaiah, Chronicles, and Kings, as well as his influence on the kingdom of Israel. We find that in 2 Kings 15. So he's mainly known for increasing the size of Assyrian territory. A conqueror. He's more than doubled the empire's territory by the time of his death, and that's a pretty good record. The economy of the Assyrian state was also drastically changed by his strategy of establishing direct Assyrian control over foreign territories by dividing them into provinces as opposed to establishing vassal kingdoms. Prior to his reign, the Assyrians had depended on tribute from vassals. However, they began to rely more and more on taxes collected by provincial governors after him. Although the strategy resulted in higher administrative expenses, it also decreased the likelihood of rebellions against Assyria. And that was the main problem in keeping your little satrapies and client states. Well, because of Tiglath-Pileser's imperial innovations, the Assyrian Empire served as a model for subsequent empires in the Middle East and beyond. The Neo-Assyrian kings claimed global dominance, known as translatio imperii, transfer of empire, spawned similar claims in later Middle Eastern empires, most notably the Achaemenid Empire. This helped aspirations for universal rule to emerge in many subsequent kingdoms and empires. But of course there were significant repercussions from the Assyrian resettlement program, which was, of course, as we've mentioned, accelerated under Tiglath-Pileser and carried on by his successors. First and foremost, it increased prosperity throughout the empire. Sure, it also resulted in notable improvements, irrigation in the provinces, this sort of thing, as deportees were assigned to teach their new communities the Assyrian-developed agricultural techniques. But the Middle East cultural and ethnic composition was permanently altered by the migration of peoples from all over the empire, and eventually a new language emerged as dominant: Aramaic, a status it held until the 14th century AD. Now that is a long time to be holding the record. Of the Semitic languages of the empire, to many of which the languages in the empire belonged, Aramaic was the most widely spoken and mutually understandable. Now, it was already an official language in the empire during Tiglath's reign, as evidenced by release from his error, that show the king recording messages in both Akkadian and Aramaic using scribes. Such a thing that certainly helps us understand and translate later texts. The best thing that you can find in archaeology is a text you don't recognize, or one that you're not familiar with in terms of the smaller little details of it, and it's right next to something recognizable. Let's say Greek or Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is what happened with the Rosetta Stone. When they found that, they found it in Egyptian, Greek, and Demotic, so they could very easily translate and figure out what was actually going on. So yes, it's very good that we have these in Aramaic and Akkadian. But that's a topic for another video, I suppose. All right, now we reach the end of the life of Tiglath-Pileser III. Wasn't that fascinating? So I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons, Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitimus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, and Christopher. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. More stuff about Assyria, naturally. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.